Mining is more than just digging, it's a science. Simply turning on a machine, turning on the water, and starting the dirt running process isn't enough. You must solve the problem. After making a major error that cost them nearly 50 ounces of gold, Chris departed the show. His body simply gave up because he had worked too hard for too long. Everything felt broken without Chris, but the machines continued to run. The staff attempted to make things better, but nothing was as successful as it had been. Stop making jokes, people. Pay attention since the mine almost collapsed immediately after Chris left. 10,000 ounces of weight. Legends are not bestowed by the Klondike. Hours, ice, dirt, and the silent dignity of finishing tasks when everyone else wants to give up are all carved into them. That man had been Chris. Steady speech, steady hands, and steady outcomes. He wasn't ostentatious. He was not a showman. However, he made the difference between merely getting by and really making it big. He served as the unseen backbone of a chaotic machine that hardly functioned for more than 10 years. However, after he vanished, nothing functioned as before. Our deadliest adversary and dearest friend is water. We can stop washing out all this gold if we can lower the water volume by turning off that pump. But something changed in season 15, in 1,000 little bursts, rather than one spectacular explosion, silently spreading invisible hairline cracks in a man's will. The season started off similarly to many others. Great stakes, great hopes, early snow melt. With an ambitious fist and his sights set on a figure that seemed like a challenge to the cosmos, Parker Schnabel emerged in full force. Like a slap, the number struck. It was risky in addition to being high. It demanded every machine running on red line, every body, and every second, and the math was flawed from the beginning. The coarse gold is typically caught here when the material strikes initially. It's typically among the best mats. What I see is actual fine gold, but that's the first mat. Too much water is present. It is preventing the gold from settling where it should. With 3 wash plants, there was just 1 Chris, 3 gold streams, 3 sleigh boxes, and 3 times the cleanup. Hard seasons were nothing new to him. He had persevered through fatigue, cold, and injury. It wasn't difficult though. There was no way. Each plant had a unique set of issues. Big Red choked on boulders too big for him. Every 3 hours, the rock sands conveyor shrieked. Bob's plant exploded as if it was angry at being contained. Chris was in the middle of it all, relying mostly on muscle memory and silent determination to keep everything together. Not soon enough, everyone noticed. The humor subsided first, followed by a stiffening and slowing of the posture and deliberate, measured movements. It's straining, but never sloppy. It wasn't weakness that was causing Chris to lag behind. No one else had ever been expected to bear this much weight for this long, and he was lagging behind. Parker was pursuing 10,000 when he noticed it. Additionally, you look at ounces rather than bruises while chasing a number that large. The physical toll wasn't the only one. The imaginary one was the one. Every mistake cost a loss. Cleaning took up 1 second for every second that was spent not recovering. Every shovel, cleanup dish, and drenched bootstrap on the floor of the gold chamber felt the tension snap taut. It was a nice idea to test out those 2 clamps today, but we still need to make some decisions. The clock is ticking. The crew remained thin as the pressure increased. Nobody was interested in removing a body from a loader or dozer. They were already strained. Chris needed to find a way. He did. Finally, a name was thrown out. Costa, Tatiana, a knowledgeable, diligent, and well-respected operator. She had never worked in the gold room, but she wasn't a newbie either. It was the only remaining move though. Tatiana was chosen. She would be guided gradually into the one area that no one else wished to enter. She was like a lifesaver. A lifeline, however, is not a rescue. Not when you already have water in your lungs. Chris made an effort. He did, of course. He gave her training and demonstrated for her how to correctly pan, clean trays, and spot gold loss before it occurs. But he had to pay extra for every new lesson. Energy, time, and sanity. The rocks continued to fall. The buckets continued to flow. And another part of him gave way behind each bit of advice and hard-won knowledge that was offered. Tatiana put forth a lot of effort. She immediately adjusted. However, 2 individuals was insufficient. Not when Chris's inconceivable feat formed the foundation of the system. Alone for too long, she was unable to carry his clothing. She was unable to turn back time. The additional assistance came too late. Already, the harm was done. Chris never stated it directly. He didn't voice any complaints. I wasn't accused by him. When he gives someone a whip, it becomes berserk and may potentially cause harm to someone. Can you imagine a fire hose this large? He simply didn't call foul, he simply wore it. Every double shift, every hose failure, and every ounce that falls short of quota. Then one day, without any fanfare, he dropped his tools, removed his gloves, and moved out of frame. The crew struggled in the ensuing hours. Tatiana persisted, but the atmosphere in the room changed. Gravity was more important than skill. The walls didn't quite hold without Chris, who had been the focal point of that room. The internet noticed outside the camp. Forums blazed. Questions were raised by viewers. Was he let go? Was he ill? Did the show refuse to air because of any drama? The reality wasn't pretty. There was no story twist. Chris Dumit had just finished. He's finished sacrificing himself for a figure too large to be respected. I've finished patching the holes that no one else would. I'm done putting in the daily effort to achieve a goal that just benefits the spreadsheet. The Klondike didn't apologize. It had taken its toll. Everyone knew, but nobody wanted to acknowledge it. The operation would continue. It would never run the same, but the machines would continue to roar. There were many faces who came and left throughout the gold rush. Chris, however, was more than a face. He served as the barrier between momentum and collapse, and that firewall ultimately failed in season 15. Everyone pretended nothing had changed after one individual went. A heartless machine. The machines continued to work after Chris Dumit left. Buckets fell, sleigh boxes overflowed, and belts spun, but something wasn't right. The soul was gone, but the rhythm remained. It resembled the breathing of a beast whose heart had been torn out. Even so, each ounce of gold felt more costly and heavier. In spirit, not in dollars. It was Tatiana Costa who drove. She tried her hardest. Where Chris had been, she was now. She handled the same mud, swept the same trays, and looked for the gold where it preferred to hide. However, good intentions meant nothing to the gold room. It required accuracy. Obsession was what it desired. Its top priority was consistency, the kind of steadiness that only Chris had learned through broken hours and chilly sweats. Season after season, the wash plants were impatient. Big Red continued to spew dirt. Throughout the night, Roxanne continued to scream, like a volcano gnawing on pebbles. Bob's plant rumbled. There was more paid dirt, more cleanup, and more pressure with each hour. And Tatiana was now the only thing separating chaos from recovery. In spite of her quickness, concentration, and flexibility, with a much smaller buffer and far less room for error, it was déjà vu. Mistakes began to accumulate, not large ones, but sufficient. This is a missing gold flake. There, a tray was washed too quickly. A little late, a sleigh box cleared out. Chris would have sensed it instinctively long before it became a serious problem. However, instinct requires time, and nobody had any more time. The reports were seen by Parker. The numbers dropped just enough to make him itch in the back of his head. He remained calm. He saw, yet he didn't lash out. Everyone did. Losing a few ounces per run doesn't seem like a big deal until you compound it by 10, 50, and ultimately 100. Water and feed rate were changed. Although it was a lot of fun, it was challenging since you were dealing with open ocean and wide open material. All of a sudden, you have a leak that you are unable to stop and are looking down the barrel of 10 ounces. The group made an effort to adapt. Tyson took over. Though none of them possessed Chris's rhythm, Mitch offered to work shifts. They were able to move dirt. They were able to operate loaders. However, the gold room served as more than just a place to clean up. It was an operating room. The money spilled across the floor at a single misstep. Tatiana, meanwhile, was rapidly burning out. She was trying to fill shoes that had been molded during 10 years of fire trial. Not because she couldn't withstand the pressure. She was battling more than simply exhaustion. She was battling ghosts. Chris was in every nook and cranny of that tent. The smell of the gloves he left behind, the way he placed pots, the way he labeled trays. At first, the ripple effects were not noticeable. Longer shifts for Tatiana, a slower cleanup cycle, a decline in recovery rates, and higher fuel expenses due to inefficient runs. However, it quickly turned into a pattern, and patterns determine the success or failure of activities. The fissures were visible by the middle of the season. The momentum was wobbly, like a wagon racing downhill with one wheel a little loose, but they were still pulling gold. For now, you could ride it, but the crash was unavoidable. Parker took a seat with the figures. Failure didn't occur to him, not quite yet. However, he perceived danger. He saw the thin line that separates shattering records from disaster. 10,000 ounces seems more like a mirage than a goal. There at all times, just out of grasp, offering weariness but promising reward. The dirt felt different too. Wetter, finer, and more difficult to sort. There was less consistency in the pay streaks. Haul trucks continued to overheat. Suddenly, things that were once manageable were enormous. The workers began yelling at one another. With each shift, fatigue crept in. Errors weren't uncommon. They were standard. Throughout it all, the goal room served as a silent reminder that without assistance, ambition fails. In a succession of tiny, merciless snaps, rather than in a single huge boom. Next to pay the price was the equipment. In a single week, Rockin's conveyor failed twice. A crushed pebble suffocated Bob's plant. Big Red's pumps required ongoing maintenance. Because Chris wasn't present to foresee failure before it materialized, maintenance was delayed. His absence was functional as well as emotional. They were bleeding both in a world where time is precious. The weather followed. Rainfall was more intense than normal. Roads became soup. Pay soil turned into paste. Parker continued to refuse to slow down. The finish line was visible to him. He saw 10,000, and as long as they got over it, he didn't care what broke. The others, however, were concerned. This year, a large pit must be dug, but the frost makes it very costly, so it's a difficult decision. Thus, we simply pulled the pin. This will be the final cleanup for some time. Mitch appeared worn out. Tyson didn't say much. Tatiana moved like if she hadn't taken a seat in weeks. The riot of oil and effort in the gold room, not optimism. They once hired a technician and consultant to look at the gold loss reports. What they already suspected he verified. Since Chris left, recovery has slowed by over 7%. It's more than simply math. Hundreds of ounces, that is, millions of dollars worth of possible income are being lost to the tailings pile. They made an effort to correct it. They were placing tape on a dam, but they also had better wash cycles, new separators, and more eyes watching the operation. It wasn't technological damage, it was cultural. Chris had done more than just fix things. He had remained upbeat. The operation felt hollow without him. Profitable, perhaps, and functional, but soulless. It had lost the element that gave it a human feel. He felt it, but he didn't express it out. It was a different machine. Perhaps there was no way to fix it. Because a man like Chris takes more than just skill when he leaves. He is rhythmic. He follows his instincts. He assumes responsibility, things that tools and training cannot replace. It's only when the system begins to falter that you realize certain things are lacking. It was difficult to lose him. Being apart from him made everything worse. The price of leaving, the expense of remaining. The Klondike no longer felt like a mine by the end of season 15. It had a wound-like sensation. It was something that had been repeatedly reopened, deeper each time, rather than a new incision. The promise of recompense was no longer in the ground. It required giving up something. There was no light to the gold. It was snarling. 9,000 ounces. They were in that location. Close. It's close enough to taste. Not close enough to rest, but close enough to believe. Because slowing down meant resting. You had to risk everything by slowing down. Furthermore, no one wished to be the one to give up. Chris Dumit stood outside and watched. He heard the stories and saw the numbers. He had experienced the sensation of striking the brink, hanging there, and wondering how far it could go while looking down. The reality was straightforward. Although the gold was pursuing something else, they were still after gold. They couldn't risk losing allegiance, time, blood, or anything else. The Klondike was no longer a goldfield. It was a grinder. The team lowered their heads. Parker persisted in pushing. Tatiana's hands were still raw. Tyson didn't take as many breaks. Mitch worked double shifts. Everyone gripped the goal more tightly. The fissures continued to spread even as their fingertips grew numb. And something else was buried deeper with each ounce that emerged from the earth. Memory, equilibrium, and trust. Once filled with ritual and laughter, the gold room was now quiet. There was no energy for banter, no time for jokes. Nothing about it felt alive. Even when the trays arrived, the aim was revealed and the work was completed. The movement was recorded by Discovery's cameras, but the meaning was not. Context-free footage, emotionless expressions, and ounces being tallied like ledger figures rather than triumphs. The audience sensed it. Fans commented, ratings changed, and the heartbeat vanished. That soul had been Chris. The pulse calmed the rush. even though it wasn't the franchise's most well-known figure or face. The show felt like machinery without him, empty but effective. The countdown to 10,000 intensified back on the scene. Time was not on their side. The weather window for the season was dwindling. The rain had intensified. The temperature dropped. It was muck on the road. For the record, his pride, and perhaps even to demonstrate that he could handle losing someone like Chris, he needed those ounces, because a general is eventually lost by every empire builder. Is it still possible for them to win the war? The group was divided by the last week, not in terms of camaraderie, but rather in terms of gasoline. Nothing remained for them to offer. Joints are rigid, eyes are empty, disputes are brief, and laughter is infrequent. Never go indoors, always go outside and dry gold. If you don't, you'll mess up since it releases a deadly gas. There was a decrease in another cleanup, a large one. There was a problem. Gold loss is a human failing rather than a technological one. A tray was missed by a shift. An early clearance of a sleeve box occurred. Perhaps a sensor was overlooked. Perhaps the lack of sleep caused someone's brain to become cloudy. Everyone felt the weight. Yet no one pointed fingers. Chris would have recognized the error if he had been blinded. They spent over 50 ounces on it. It's not a dent, it's a crater. In slurry, almost $250,000 were lost. Even worse, it took place close to the finish line. They lost more than just ounces with that loss. It sapped the last of their remaining fortitude. The dig became silent from that point on, by resignation, not by choice. Parker remained calm. He didn't hold me responsible. However, there was a change in his expression, a mixture of remorse and comprehension. The empire was just about holding. He adjusted the schedules, reran the statistics, and looked at the maps. They needed to be flawless, something they hadn't done since Chris left. But there was still a way to 10-0. For a last push, the crew jolted to attention. They came together. Tatiana worked 2 jobs. Tyson woke up. Mitch consumed food. And Parker did his usual thing. He set his sights higher. Chris had known that all along. He walked for that reason. He loved the work too much to watch it become meaningless, not because he didn't enjoy it. That understanding struck Parker more forcefully than the wind. Due to being a leader is more than just setting goals. It's about vision, tempo, and vibe. That was what Chris had given them, not with lectures, but with presence, humor, and composure in the face of adversity. That storm had lost its eye. Parker sat by himself at the outskirts of camp after the last cleaning was completed and long after the last camera had gone black. Weeks of unrelenting digging had left the ground beneath him damaged and scarred. Didn't appear to have won. It appeared worn out. Someone had taken the gold. The celebration never came, but the purpose was accomplished. The weight of something emptied out from within suddenly weighed down what ought to have been a victory. Our neighbor lives next door. A few weeks ago, he came to me and wanted to sell his property. I've been talking to him about buying him out, and today, I inked a deal. He remained silent. There were no toasts made by the crew. Since they all understood in their hearts that this wasn't a victory, nobody applauded or clapped. It was a reckoning. They had surpassed 10,000 ounces, but in the process, they had lost something essential. The kind of loss that leaves everything quieter but doesn't create any noise. The team returned to camp and packed things with the exhausted precision of those who had contributed more than they could. At last, Tatiana slept soundly through the night. At the sound of pumps, Tyson ceased flinching. Mitch lingered close to the trucks as if he didn't want to acknowledge that it was finished, holding on to his tools for longer than was necessary. Chris's name was not spoken aloud. It was painful to recall how important he had been, not because people had forgotten him. Chris Dumit did not make a last appearance. He didn't provide post-season observations or an explanation in interviews. There was nothing left for him to correct, nothing to prove. He let the video do the talking, allow quiet to reverberate more loudly than words. Without him, the crew started to realize what they had taken for granted. One man's modest presence combined with expertise, composure, and consistency. The names of some legends are etched on stone, tray by tray, cleaning by cleanup. Chris Dumit chiseled his into gravel until the whole operation rested on habits he had molded with quiet grit and calloused hands. And it wasn't a tumble when he eventually released his grip. It was a liberation, the kind that can only be made peacefully by a man who has sacrificed everything. By allowing Chris Dumit to slip into silence, did Parker abandon his commitment to his legacy? Post your thoughts in the comments section. For interesting content, like and subscribe.